Hello and welcome to Naad Education. This series of lectures is to clear our basics of biology, and the first topic or the first lecture for today is biological classification, nomenclature and systematics. So, we will first discuss what is biological classification and why is it necessary. Then, what is the meaning, definition, and the need of nomenclature. And lastly, we will talk about systematics. Once you get cleared of the classification, what it is, and what is nomenclature, you will automatically understand what is systematics. So we will deal systematics at last. So let's start with part 1. What is classification and why is it done? So as you already know, there are millions of species, millions of organisms on this planet. And how do we understand the diversity that we see on this planet? One way is to characterize all the organisms, to know about each of the organisms, but that creates an issue because these many organisms, if you want to understand what is exactly happening, we must have some framework under which we can group the organisms based on their similarities. That is where classification comes in. So the process of delimiting, establishing boundaries between different sets of organisms, ordering them, meaning in a sense that which organism came first or which one has a higher level in terms of complexity or any in with respect to any other criteria, if we are ordering them and ranking organisms in such that we are making groups of them, that these group of organisms have these similarities with such characteristics, then this is all we call classification. And when we classify, these three keywords are important, that we are delimiting, that we are establishing boundaries, we don't want any, there might be certain organisms that might overlap in terms of characteristics, but basically we are trying to create groups of organisms that are similar to each other so that we can understand the relationship of one group to another as well as these individuals within themselves, and then we can understand the other processes that are happening in the environment or evolutionarily that has shaped them. Also, when we talk about classification, the process of classifying is one thing, that is to group the organisms based on similarities, but ultimately when we get a chart or when we get a scheme, then also we call it a classification. So classification can be a noun, it can be a verb. So what is the function of classification? It allows for efficient cataloging of the enormous number of species of organisms on Earth so that we have a record of all these species. We still haven't found every species, every organism, especially in very dense ecosystems such as tropical rainforests or deep down in the ocean. And it also provides a detailed system for storage and retrieval of their names. So once they are named, they can be easily accessed. We can see what species are we talking about while reporting them or while reporting their characteristics. Classification serves a descriptive function to define each taxon through descriptions. We'll talk about taxon and categories and then come to this point. And then it also creates detailed hypothesis for evolutionary relationships among the organisms that inhabit Earth. So once we have created the groups of organisms, then we can see how are these organisms related to each other or are different to each other, and then we can create subcategories or even larger broad categories under which we can club them, and try to understand that which organism basically was derived from the other group or which group was derived from the other group. So now we talk about the hierarchical categories that are recognized by the ICZN. And here is an example of our common dog that you see. And there are a lot of varieties of dogs that you see in your locality or with people around you or with your neighbors. So these are the broad groups, and then there are these subgroups. So the categories that are recognized are kingdom. Under a kingdom there can be many phylum. Under a phylum there can be many classes. Under that there is cohorts, but mostly you will see that cohorts are not mentioned. And then under the cohorts there are order. If the cohort is not mentioned, then under the class there would be many orders. Under the order there would be many families, and under the family there would be many tribes. Again, tribes are not very commonly mentioned, and under a tribe there would be many genera, or in the singular it's called genus. And under the genus there would be many species, and then under species there can be various subspecies. Here's an example of the common dog. So it the species is Canis lupus, and the genus is Canis, the family is Canidae, the order is Carnivora. So there can be many carnivorous organisms that come into this order, and there's this family called Canidae. And then above the carnivore order there is class Mammalia, in which there would be many mammals, and then there would be a phylum Chordata, and then kingdom Animalia, which includes all the animals, and there is no plants in it. There is a separate kingdom for plants and other types of organisms. And then there is domain Eukarya. So these are the categories that have been recognized. Now before you get much confused, I would like to talk about what is the difference between category and taxa. So categories, as you just saw, are these. So kingdom, phylum, class, genera, all are categories. These are the hierarchical levels or ranks that are used in a classification. Taxa are the various names that are there in a category. So taxa are hierarchical groups of organisms, and their rank describes their position in the hierarchy. So there can be various taxa in the category. So for example, Mammalia, which you just saw, is placed in the category of hierarchical rank of class. So there can be many classes, that is the category. Oh, sorry, the rank or the category is a class, and there can be various taxa in this class. Now we come to part 2, and we talk about nomenclature. So, what is the definition of nomenclature? What is it? And some rules of biological nomenclature we will discuss. Biological nomenclature is the system of rules and recommendations that names organisms based on their underlying classification. So, whatever classification that is allocated to them, based on that, uh, they get a name. So, we just saw for the dog that it had class Mammalia, and further whatever family it was, it got a specific generic name, and then a specific it got a species name to it. But all of that depends on what is its classification. Nomenclature is an important tool for biologists that facilitates communication and stability. That's why it is important. When you are communicating your research work or about certain organism in during research, it's important to give a proper name, a specific name. Which species are you talking about? Which subspecies are you talking about? That is why nomenclature is important for communication. And once there is clear communication, then the stability or integrity of research is maintained. So Swedish naturalist Carolus Linnaeus first established a system of naming organisms, now called the binomial nomenclature, and that was established somewhere back in 1735. Binomial means that it has two parts. So basically, it will have a generic name and a specific name that will form the main uh, name for the organism. Binomial comes from the word binomen, which means two parts. After that, every organism was named using the generic name and the specific name. This I've already talked about. One example you can just see here. The other example you saw for the dog. Here's another example. So the Pacific Ocean coastal sea stars, they are named as so these are these starfish. The scientific name is Pisaster giganteus. Pisaster is the generic name or the name of the genus to which they belong, and giganteus is their specific name or the species name. Now we talk briefly about the Strickland code. If somebody asks you what it is, when Strickland code established in 1842, the British Association for the Advancement of Science formed a code of rules called the Strickland Code. So basically, it adopted most of the things from the binomial nomenclature, but there were certain confusions that the Strickland code had to address. So sometimes the same species, even though the binomial nomenclature existed, had multiple names based on if they were named by multiple people in different parts of the world. So that confusion had to be removed. Also, what was required was to adopt a system to allocate names if many exist. So let's say if there are many names, which name has to be selected? First of all, there shouldn't be many names, and if there are many names, which one should be selected? And sometimes what happened was certain names had more than, okay, so when they were naming they had a generic name, the name of the genus. The name of the genus composed of two words. So they decided to have only one word. So all these things were addressed in the Strickland Code in by the British Association for the Advancement of Science in 1842. In 1901, the newly formed International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature adopted a revised version of the Strickland Code called the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature (ICZN). Sometimes the short form is important, you must know the full form of this. Then it became binomial nomenclature. So initially it was called binomial nomenclature. Later on they started calling it binomial nomenclature, which means that the names should be binary, should not have more than two words in it. Binomial means you should have a generic name and a species name, means you should have at least two categories to name the organism. Binomial nomenclature means you should only have two words. You should not have more words in the generic name. It can also happen that you can, for certain reasons, you might have to use the subspecies name, which is why then it will become a trinomen. For example, the Pacific sea star, which we just talked about, can also be named as Pisaster giganteus capitatus. The capitatus here is a subspecies, a sort of variety of this species. So the five principles of biological nomenclature: botanical, zoological and bacterial nomenclatures are independent of each other. The plant and animal genera can still have the same name. A taxon can bear only one correct name. No two genera within a given code can bear the same name. And no two species names within the same genus can bear the same name. The correct or valid name of a taxon is based on the priority of publication, whichever is the first usage. So you get an answer for the previous 3 points that were addressed in the Strickland code. Which name would be preferred? So based on the priority of the publication, whosoever has published its work first, whatever name that they have given to the to the organism will be accepted. For the category of superfamily in animals and order in plants, and for all categories below these taxon names, must be based on the type specimens, type species, or type genera. For example, when you are talking about class Mammalia, so it clearly tells that it is a mammal, which you already know what it is. So the naming is such that it is describing the organism. When it is saying Canidae, it has something to do with canines, something of that sort. So the names that are below certain categories, they should be named in a manner that they give some information. For example, in this case, class Mammalia tells that it is a mammal. Part 3 and the last part, I don't think it will be very difficult to understand now. So systematics, what is it? So basically the role of systematics is to document and understand Earth's biological diversity, to reconstruct the history of that biodiversity and develop classifications of living organisms. You just saw why is classification important, what is nomenclature. So all those things come under the science of systematics. So, systematics is the study of the diversity of life on Earth and of any relationships among species. This is a definition given by G.G. Simpson, and what it involves is, what are the things that we do in systematics? The compilation, naming, and description of all the flora and fauna on this planet. So definitely it will be requiring the rules of nomenclature to name them, identification of the different species through exploration and whatever other scientific methods, and then classification is also an important part of systematics. So classifying the organisms into different taxa, grouping them based on similarity, now you know what is classification, and generating phylogenetic hypotheses based on morphological or molecular genetic data, biogeographic analysis, and studies of population biology and genetics. Techniques such as embryology, serology, physiology, immunology, biochemistry, population and molecular genetics, and molecular gene sequencing, all of these are used in basically identifying and classifying these organisms into different taxa. So all these techniques are used for classification and then they are named accordingly. And one thing more to remember is that if there is a recent name for that organism, even though it is much more suitable for that organism based on its characteristics, still the earlier name which was published will be taken. So now you understand what is systematics. It's the field under which all this classification, naming, description comes, and you already now know what is the definition of classification and nomenclature.